Hi, welcome to this new class called art103. Today we're going to focus on depth and perspective, and to do that we're going to look at some paintings and some image of Citizen Kane in this film. So what I would like to explain in this class is that there is a difference between perspective and depth, and sometimes you can have a lot of depth with no information on perspective, and sometimes you can have perspective without necessarily having a lot of depth. So to try to explain that, we're going to start with this image, which obviously is a very centered composition if you refer to what we've been talking about before, where you have a good use of the color palettes and the yellow and the blue that we can also see in the foreground here, or in these characters here, or again in here. So they really use the complementary approach that we explained a bit earlier. We have the same in these elements there. So you have a lot of try to work on this image in color wise and composition wise. Now we are talking about perspective. So perspective wise, we obviously have these very strong lines that have been drawn like really to go to the center of what you're after. Let me just actually draw these lines. I'm just going to take the line tool, and so if you take these lines, you can tell that they meet here. So just a bit higher than the horizon, so that should meet on the horizon, but obviously we're just a little bit higher here, but it's not that bad. So this is our vanishing point. So obviously we're creating a perspective here, which goes right in the center of the image. Technically, if we were following these lines here, we should also meet at the same. I'm not sure it's absolutely perfect, but globally we have a good perspective that goes to this vanishing point here. So that's the first idea for creating some depth here, having like a very clear vanishing points, in this case right in the middle. So now these lines, 3 lines here, are supposed to be parallel. So technically, if we were following these lines, they should also meet in a focal vanishing point a bit further away on both sides here. And these vanishing points, the 3 of them, should be aligned on the horizon. So that's the rule. All the vanishing points needs to be aligned on the horizon. So that's the basics of the perspective rule. So that's kind of easy to get. Now, the problem in this image for me, I mean, if I may say, it's that we don't have a lot of depth. So why do we have that perspective but not so much of depth? For a few reasons. First of all, because we don't have a lot of contrast. All the colors saturation, either from the foreground, like this blue here. Oh, that's a nice brush. This blue here is the same than that the blue intensity that you're going to have here, or the blue which is used in the background. So that is like not possible to have this sort of, contrast should be a bit different, because otherwise it just fights against the idea of creating some perspective and depth. And we're going to look at some Canaletto painting to explain that. There is a very strong work on the colors here. So the blue here, which we also can see here in here, with the orange here and here, or between this one, is not enough to create some depth. So it's going to balance the image. It's going to create a good harmony, but it's not going to create a lot of depth. These trees here, green, which are matching the green of the dress here, are probably too big. They're meant to be really high if you do that. So like, it's not like you really understand the scale of things from the foreground to the background. If you look at the size of these characters here and the size of this tree here, it means that the trees are huge. Why would you only have 2 trees like this? The atmospheric perspective effects here with the blue haze is really saturated, which also is not going to help. If we look at this image, we have the same, pretty much the same setup here. We have a lot of colors, well balanced, not a very strong light direction, the same that in the first. Very centered composition, very clear perspective lines that you can really follow to the center. So these very strong lines are all pointing to the main character here. But we don't have a lot of contrast from the foreground to the background. We don't have a lot of way to understand and read what is going on in this image. And that is why it still feels a bit flat. This is a huge painting, and it still feels very flat because of a lack of lighting probably and use of the contrast. So now, before going to the cinema and Citizen Kane, no, actually, I'm going to start with Citizen Kane and then we're going to go to Canaletto. Citizen Kane is a very good example of how to create some depth without necessarily having a lot of perspective. If I take this image, obviously this image has a lot of depth because you can really clearly identify a foreground here and a midground there and a very distant background with this character. So we have this triangle, 3 faces, which we can really identify as getting smaller and smaller in scale. You don't even need to have perspective lines. Like I would not be able to give you where my focal points or vanishing points is here. We don't have any perspective lines really to follow, but we don't need them because what we have is this character looking here, this character looking there, and probably this character looking around here. So we have already some, by just following the eyes, some travel that is being done in this image. To make sure that we are going to see this guy here and not miss him, we have this line here, which really points towards him. We also have this one here to make sure that we're going to look back. And even this shadow here is going that direction, so we can focal here. So there is no really chance for us to miss him. We're clearly going to see him. So he's small, black and white. It's like the repetition of this one here. So we can really see a lot of depth, but there is no perspective whatsoever, no perspective lines. If I take the other one, that is the same, exactly the same process. So what is actually really fascinating in this image is that the character is here. He's so small that we cannot even see his face, but it's fine because he's here. So we can totally identify that what this guy is looking at is not the frame, it's really the character, but the character is this guy. So we can then say, okay, again, the eyes and the direction of where people are looking in photographs and films is really important, and the contrast is really important. So, like highlights on the face, just where you have the darkened side of the wall, just to make sure that you read it correctly. Bit of backlit here. Same with the hand, very dark here, but the hand is bright. And then we do the opposite, where it's brighter. You bring some darker area. Remember what we said in the course when we spoke about the use of negative space. That's exactly what we are doing here. We are creating negative space to shape things and create some contrast. So here we have the white versus the black, and then we have very kind of diffused, not very strong lit area with a lot of people that we really don't want to focus on. And then you have the main section here, which is really contrasty with a lot of highlights. So you're clearly going to focus here. That was impossible to shoot, so they had to shoot it with making some mask and having 2 images. Otherwise, you would not be able to do the focus on both at the same time. You would not have enough depth of field to do that. So they had to do a mask and then recompass everything. So that's quite interesting to see how to create some depth in an image without using necessarily perspectives. Now I'm gonna go to my main topic of today, which is Canaletto, because these paintings are amazing when we want to talk about perspectives and depth. I'm gonna start with this one, which is the Canal Warwick, and it's really interesting to see how the artist is bringing some depth in his painting. So if you look at this image, you're gonna see that you see the repetition of colors as we had before, like this red and blue and white is red and blue and white here is red and blue and white there. And already this pattern, and you probably have a bit of red here, this pattern is already being repeated by following this travel path, which really goes from the foreground to the background in a way that, I forgot that one here as well, which really goes from the foreground to the background. So we clearly can identify and follow this. Then you always have the notion of overlap, which is really interesting with him. So the overlap is when you're going to have something in front of something else, and is going to be used to create this negative space that is going to give us the sense of depth. So for example, here, if you look at this guy here, he's got like bright yellowish outfit and hair in front of a very like a darker piece of grass and shadow. Same for her. So she's really detached herself from this. So you can say there is a plane here and there is a plane there. This one is clearly in front of the other one, so you can identify it and it's going to create some depth. You have the same here, the use of the light to just have a bit of light on this boy in front of something which is relatively dark. Here, bright on the dark, darker on the bright. So you see it's going to be like very systematic. And this is how you're going to understand that things are being layered from different planes. If you had to recreate this, you would see some cards and you would put them in front of the others, and the light is not that strong in this image. I mean, you have a light direction and you have some nice shadows, but you don't have necessarily any perspective lines, but you already have a lot of depth because these small characters here, and you can follow them pretty much from the foreground to the very distant, and they're not just being forgotten a bit like this one in this painting, because the problem in this one is that you don't have anything to link the foreground to the background. So these characters are all frontal and presented on different layers, but you don't really have any way to go from the foreground to the background, where in this image you really can follow some lines. Plus you have some bridges here that really give the impression that you go from the foreground to more distance. You have some path that you can follow here to access here, and then you have this. So you actually can understand how you can move and walk from this place to this one, right to the top of the hill. So because you understand that, your brain automatically creates the depth, and that is a fascinating way to do that. Let's take another one. Let's take Eton College. Eton College is a very nice one, where you use exactly the same technique here. So here you have the main college here, and you have all these characters here where you can really detach them. So they are in the light in front of something which is darker, in the light in front of something which is darker, in the light in front of something which is darker. So you always have that the face right in front of this piece of grass with the bright. So you see that's really the contrast, which is really interesting and create this effect. Without this contrast, you would not necessarily understand as well what is going on. So that is a very, very good technique to do that. Even the dog catch the light and bring that effects of overlap that creates all this nice contrast. Now you can tell that the blacks level here are more dense than in the back. So you have also this kind of perspective with a bit of atmosphere and haze going on. And now the tree here doing all of this really point us in the direction of that. So the eye can also travel from the foreground to the background. You don't have a bridge here. You don't need to have a bridge. You can follow, the eye can follow that, but you also know that you could cross with the boat if you don't have the bridge. So again, you understand how you can go from the foreground to the background. Scaling wise, these trees are big, these trees are smaller. So these trees are smaller. So again, you can clearly identify a way to have it kind of consistent. Let's take now this one, which has actually some perspective lines. That's one of the first one where you really can follow some perspective. So this one is a very beautiful painting, color-wise and in terms of details and contrast. This is really impressive, the amount of work. And you find the same, the use of quite a few colors that you can follow and identify: blue, red, brown, gray, yellow. And you can really recognize them. It's always the same. So you don't have like a lot of different colors everywhere. You see the palette is relatively small. Lighting wise, you have a strong light direction, creating some shadows, so that's quite good. And then obviously you can really follow what's going on from the foreground until the deep background here. So something which is really interesting in this image, I think, is that you kind of lose the ideas of the boats all being here, because it's kind of start to look messy, so you cannot identify anymore so much. And why is that? It's because you are missing the contrast that you have in the foreground. So obviously in the foreground you want to identify it really well, because that's your main where you want to put the details, and then you lose the details for the background. So how do you do that? Again, by using the contrast. So here you're going to have a lot of understanding of the geometry of everything. You can really see the lines, you can identify diagonals, you can see all the ropes, and you can see all the characters, because they all have been placed very carefully in a way you can see them, you don't lose them. And the more you're going to go in the background, the more you're going to start to lose things. So here, if you take these boats here, you start to lose a little bit the information. Even the guy here is a bit less visible than this one. This one is very directionally lit and bright in front of something which is darker. This character here is a bit more merged into the background. And in this section there, you don't even see the boats or the characters anymore. You don't understand them. Why? Because you don't have these highlights on the boats and ropes and mats and everything, giving you the information of the shapes of things, and you don't have the contrast of the people. So they are all lost. These characters on the boats are way less visible than these characters here. And it's not just a question of scale, it's also a question of how they're being lit and used in the image. And by doing that, this is how you're going to focus more on the foreground. You're going to see more details, and then you're going to see a bit less details, and then you're going to lose all the details. So again, you're going to have that happening. So you're going to have depth in this image. And that's what it takes to create some depth in an image. It's really about having your eyes traveling from the foreground to the background, and that works very well. Let's take a look at this one now, which is going to be my last example, but probably one of the nicest painting that you could see. You have a very good mixture of everything I've just said. You have perspective lines, yes, you can tell. You have the use of the negative space. Look at that. Look how systematic it is. Right where you have the darker part of this boat, you have the white shirt. Boom. You see clearly this guy being overlapping with the boats in front of him. Same here. Like, you clearly see him. You clearly see him. And then the more you're going to go, the more you're going to start to lose them. So you still see them a bit by having a bit of contrast, but not so much. It's not going to be white on black. This time it's going to be white on bluish. You see? This one is less visible than this one. And this one is even less visible, and this one is no longer visible. So clearly we are losing some details. Foreground, we try to create this contrast. So we're going to have this character, we're going to see them, a bit of colors, a bit of lights in front of the shadow. Look at my hand, look at what I'm pointing at. Same here, a bit of whites to balance everything. Then introduction of haze, and we're losing the details. So when you had some very contrasty boats here with clearly lights kicking here or there, or this piece of white stuff, in the background, you lose that. In these boats, in this section here, you don't have them anymore. In the houses, very understandable shapes with the columns and the shadow, and like a lot of, sculpts. These ones are way flatter. So we are losing the idea of details and contrast. So therefore we place it far away. So because we have them pushed in the background, and we have all the information to really focus on the foreground, it creates a lot of depth in the image. So that's how you're going to do that sort of exercise. So if you look at this, all this image that I just presented you, you have different ways to do that. So Canaletto, obviously, just to recap a little bit, Canaletto is really using the lights and the details to really put everything in the foreground, and then starting to fade it into something which is going to be more messy and less structured for the background. So you lose this information, and naturally you're going to see the progression, giving the idea of perspective. Eyes in Citizen Kane to go from the foreground to the background, and in the paintings here, just the use of the lines of perspective that obviously are not enough to give you a good sense of depth. So you see the limitation of different techniques, and how you can use them and merge them together to really help to create depth images or relatively flat images. It's really about guiding your eyes through the image and make the spectator look where you want him to look. And to do that, we also are using the amount of details to create some scale, which is something that we haven't spoken about yet. So that's going to be the next class. We're going to talk about the scale and how to bring this idea of very close foreground and very deep background by playing with the amount of details that you have everywhere and understanding how big things are. So that's it. I hope you enjoy this, and I'll see you soon.